Wow, and let me add my thanks for you being here. And by here, I mean actually this specific room. So a lot of good choices out there. Thank you. Um, I wear a number of hats in this industry. I'm actually the co-founder and CTO of a marketing software company myself, Ion Interactive. We make a SaaS platform for interactive content. But then sort of what started as a hobby, writing a blog called Chief Martech about 8 years ago, really my own personal fascination with how the worlds of technology and marketing were intertwining and changing each other. A blog that, like most blogs, sort of lived in obscurity for many years, and then very recently, over the past few years, took on a life of its own, really connected with a whole community of people who are playing a role in helping to leverage technology in the remaking of marketing. And we also started a conference around that, Martech, that we do a couple times a year. So I guess if I'm known for one thing, it is unfortunately probably this crazy landscape. This is a representative sample, I emphasize representative sample, of marketing technology vendors out in the world today. It started with pretty humble beginnings. The first version of this I did in 2011. I was inspired by Terry Kawaj's Lumascape for the ad tech world. That would be cool to have something like that for MarTech. So I tried to think of all the different marketing technology tools I knew in different categories that people were using. And at the time I found like 150 of them. And I remember in showing this slide at the first conference, people were like, 150 marketing technologies. Whew. How will we ever keep track of them all? And then I went back and did it again the next year, and it grew. And a couple years later, it grew again, and again. And by this point in time, the cries of, oh my goodness, this is just out of control, it's got to consolidate, were deafening. And I was actually very happy to hear those because, for all the people who were prognosticating that this landscape was going to get smaller finally, I was like, thank goodness, this is becoming a lot of work moving these little logos around on a page. Sadly, 2016 was not my year. It got larger again. And although I haven't started the adventure for 2017 yet, it could be larger yet. Now, the reaction to this is varied, but I think maybe, if we took out all the nuance, it would largely be what this survey from the folks at Signal asked marketers about a year and a half ago. How do you feel the marketing technology landscape is changing? And 61% chose the answer, evolving rapidly. I love the question, like, how do you feel about this? It's very visceral. And 61% saying evolving rapidly, that's a lot. 6% even said it was evolving at light speed. Hard to imagine any faster than that. And then I always get a slight chuckle of thinking about the 3% who say not much. I'm worried about them a little bit, I have to confess. So what does this mean for us as marketers? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, right? The good news is, if you sort of imagine what we're collectively doing, right? The successful, I call it the scope of successful marketing practice has expanded tremendously over the past 10 years. I mean, we are really growing our capabilities. The challenge is the curve of expectations, partly driven by marketing technology, but frankly just driven more by the technology out in the world. The technology that our buyers are leveraging. The expectations for marketing to be able to get our arms around this seem to be growing faster than our ability to deal with the practice. So if you feel that way, I assure you, you're not alone. Almost everyone I talk to feels that way. I feel that way every morning. So I thought for today's session, cover a few different angles of looking at this. One is just, we should probably tackle that elephant of, that crazy landscape, what's happening with it. The oversimplified version, but I think accurate one, is to say the scope of marketing, let's say it was that size and scale, that circle. And there used to be a set of software applications that we imagined could fit in that application space. And generally, the size of those businesses to be viable, they had to be VC funded. They had to have a certain scale. And that was the world as we knew it 10 years ago in marketing tech. But two things have happened. First of all, the scope of marketing has exploded, and it just keeps growing. Marketing is now getting more and more entangled with pretty much every aspect of businesses, collaborations with sales, with service, marketing being embedded in products. So the scope keeps growing. So not only is there more opportunity in that increased scope for software, but also in the software world, the viability of small software vendors, micro software vendors, has never been greater. They're able to leverage infrastructure as a service like Amazon and Google and Azure, open source projects. They're leveraging their own inbound marketing techniques to be able to reach their audience. So you've actually got, in addition to the major players, and there's plenty of them still, you also have this thriving ecosystem of small specialized vendors too. One example I always use is Moz. Moz is not Adobe, it's not an Oracle, it's not a Salesforce. But man, for what they do it really, really well. That is a strong, stable business. Now, in any category, there's a tremendous amount of competition right now. And, marketing technology isn't somehow defying the rules of markets. In the tech world, we could sort of imagine, these things follow a certain pattern, right? There's some innovations, and then as they start to capture the market, all these other competitors start to come into the space. You'll have like a peak of an explosion of vendors within a particular space, and then eventually consolidation starts to happen. The winners pull away, and that keeps going, and it gets narrower and narrower until, kind of this little bump where at some point, this solution that we think we had solved gets disrupted again by some new innovation. And a way of looking at this over time is you can imagine a small number of brands, and as time goes by, eventually the number one brand in a given category pulls away, the number two brand, the number three brand, and then it goes down from there. There's still actually a lot of niche brands within that other brand string, but consolidation is a real force. But what makes this complicated in the marketing technology world is we're not dealing with one of those innovation curves. What's happening here is we're being hit with increasing cycles of innovation. Just as we thought we had figured out, okay, CRM, and the CRM world has taken a certain curve here over the past 30 years. Well, then after that, there was marketing automation, and then starting to be, sooner, we're in customer data platforms, predictive analytics, ABM, journey optimization engines, artificial. You could go down the list of buzzwords you're hearing, and each one of these actually becomes a curve of new vendors and new innovations. And so if you look at this over time, you could say sort of the classic way we would see technology is there would be a particular technology that would take hold. And eventually it would mature and fade away, and then some new technology would be the next thing. Right there, we kind of have a view of what CRM and, say, marketing automation look like. But as we're dealing with more and more of these whole curves of innovation coming at us at faster accelerations, it actually looks more like this thing on top, where we're still trying to figure out B, and C, and then D keep coming. This is why it actually makes it, in my opinion, very hard to predict what the marketing technology landscape is going to do in aggregate. Because, yes, if you look at this idea of consolidation, of companies exiting the space, being acquired, going out of business, that's absolutely happening. But at the same time, more new vendors keep coming in. And they're not just coming in on the same traditional categories. They're coming up with new ways of thinking about this stuff. And so what you get in that middle, that sort of turquoise section of, okay, well, what's the space of currently active MarTech vendors? It's a complex number. This is one of those sort of inside baseball things where, if afterwards you want to sit down and have a beer, be happy to talk as long as you'd like until your eyes droop about the marketing tech landscape. But for most marketers, it is a bit of a distraction, right? It's really, okay, well, what do we do about this? So one angle of looking at that is looking at it through a technical architecture thing. Okay, how do we deal with this technology inside our organization? From an architecture perspective, the golden vision that was once promoted was this idea that there'd be a suite, right? The marketing cloud, And we would buy one marketing cloud from one vendor, and it would just do everything, and we'd be done. And we would sit on a beach, and people would feed us grapes. Hasn't entirely happened. What we've seen more of are these things of platforms, where there's like a hub. Hey, speaking of hub, right? It could be HubSpot, you know, and then there are things that get added on that surround that, you know, Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce. They all have this model to a certain degree. But the thing is, not particularly as you get into a larger organization, right? It's very rare to find one solution that really drives at the center of that. You might have one thing for your CRM platform. You might have another thing for your marketing automation platform. You might have another thing for your web content experience management platform. And so once you start getting into more mid-sized organizations and above, what you more typically see are these multi-platform architectures, where they've got 2 or 3 major vendors, again, better at connecting them together, but then each one of those major vendors also has these little satellite capabilities that are floating around it as well. For larger organizations, they've even taken this further to something, I guess I would call a bus architecture, which is they essentially, it's almost a layer below, I guess in this case above, the major platforms, where the company is pulling data from all of these different major platforms they use, and they're taking it control into their own underlying database systems, their own underlying way of connecting these things. And the advantage of that is if any one of these vendors goes away, they've created an architecture that actually makes it easier to be able to remove one and plug in another. A big part of what's made this possible, one of the categories on that crazy landscape, is this whole collection of stuff around what's the term iPaaS, integration platforms as a service. You know, and there's some very simple, fun ones like Zapier. You've probably heard of them, or If This Then That. But there are also some very advanced and technical ones, folks like MuleSoft. Tag management systems are very often this kind of a solution. So this is another one of these topics where over beer, I am delighted to go into the inner details of enterprise architecture for marketing tech stacks. But it is not necessarily the most appealing conversation to everyone. And more importantly, it's not the most important conversation to have. So Cheryl Schultz here, perhaps. Hey, I see her in the back. She's way in the back. She's one of the co-founders of Cabinet M. About a year ago, I was at Cheryl's office, and Cabinet M tracks all these different marketing technology vendors, and they have tools to let marketers be able to create stacks and track them and all sorts of stuff. I was at her office, and we were debating about, is this thing going to grow or not grow? And so she actually drew this thing of saying, okay, well, let's say there is this curve of how many marketing technology vendors there can be at any one point in time. And maybe we're nearing peak MarTech. As it turned out, we were absolutely wrong. We were nowhere near peak MarTech. What she said was the most interesting thing is not that curve. It's this line. She drew this exponential line coming the other direction as basically, how is adoption of this technology, and not purchase of this technology, but actual adoption and harnessing of this technology going in the organizations? Because in that regard, I think we all feel we're still early in this game. So I want to really tackle, for the rest of this session, thoughts around the organizational shift in supporting all these marketing technology stacks. There's a setup for this I've done at a few presentations where I ask people, say, hey, let's play this game, name that profession. I'm going to show you 2 different circles where in one we have things like analytical, programming, automation. In the other we have creative design and experience. And I ask people to say, okay, well, which one of these circles represents marketing? And which one of these circles represents software development? There was a time where that would have been an easy question to answer. Well, obviously, the one on the left is marketing, right? We live in a world now where those characteristics start to look a lot alike. I mean, marketers are certainly dealing now with analytical aspects of their work, programming, marketing automation stuff, right? Programmatic advertising, the development of websites. A lot of stuff in that sphere is now under marketing's responsibility. But also in the other direction, we're seeing that software people are increasingly focused on the issues of user experience. How do we like creatively build products that have growth built into them? You know, the experience part of that is just become such a centerpiece of the software world. And so what you see is actually these two fields are increasingly sharing more and more characteristics. One way to frame this, this gentleman, Isaac Wyatt, is the director of marketing operations from New Relic, a large company out in Silicon Valley. And he gave a presentation at my MarTech conference a couple years ago, where he basically was comparing marketing automation to software development. And his key slide was on the left, showing a set of configuration screens, I believe in Marketo, of putting together a nurture campaign. And then on the right was a little bit of pseudocode, you know, programmer speak for what's the algorithm of this. Now, if you have any background in coding, the funny thing is, the one on the right might be actually easier to read than the one on the left. But the powerful realization is they're identical. These two things are expressing the exact same goal, the exact same way to achieve that goal. And the light bulb went off over my head when he shared this because I knew marketers were adopting a lot of software. My crazy MarTech landscape had convinced me of that. But what Isaac made me realize is actually as marketers, we're almost creating a lot of software ourselves. That all these marketing automation campaigns, they're an example of kind of these little mini software programs. We're programmers and we don't even necessarily know it. So that was the inspiration for the book I wrote that was published this year, Hacking Marketing, was to say, okay, well, if marketing and software are becoming more and more, if they're overlapping in more and more ways, you know, most people in marketing don't have a background in software engineering, don't need a background in software engineering, but are there ideas we might be able to borrow from the software world for rethinking how we manage marketing in this technology-powered environment? One of the key examples in the book revolves around agile marketing. How many of you have heard of agile marketing? Okay, yeah, it's become a very popular term. How many of you are actually practicing what you'd say is some form of agile marketing? Okay, a subset, but awesome. Well, this is an example of something that actually these agile management methodologies were borrowed from software. And marketing is now adapting them. You know, I mean, the super, 30-second version, right, is, the alternative to agile in project management terms was often the waterfall, right? This very structured long-term approach, have a long planning period, then a long design period, then a production period, and then at the very end we deliver. And software used to be created that way until after project, people would get to the end of the 1 year, 2 year, waterfall, and just requirements had changed, the market had changed. Software people realized, okay, this isn't working. We're fighting change instead of harnessing it. They started to develop these agile methodologies to build software more incrementally, more iteratively. So what does that have to do with marketing? Well, this waterfall management structure was frankly how we'd run marketing for years, right? This was the yearly marketing plan, had a waterfall structure to it. But in today's world where things are just changing so rapidly, and in particular these digital channels just are so wonderful for us because they give us the potential to harness feedback, to try things and experiment and measure them and adjust as we go along in a way that we could never have done before, But in order to take advantage of those feedback mechanisms, marketing has had to, deprecate the yearly marketing plan. I mean, it still has value to us from a strategic perspective, but the way in which we operationalize is increasingly using more of these agile methodologies. So I know most of you have heard of agile marketing, so I won't dive deeper into that. If you want the book Hacking Marketing, I'd say about half the book is dedicated to really describing how you implement agile marketing and how it works and why it works. But I want to share a few other examples from you of these parallels between marketing and software and how they can help us in our technology management challenge. Just to beat the concept about these parallels between marketing and software, My oversimplified view of marketing has been traditionally the intersection of messages and media. Nod to Marshall McLuhan, that the art of communications is about deciding what we want to say and then how and where it appears. A lot of incredible innovation in that space over decades. But here in the digital world, there is an entirely different dimension that we as marketers are now dealing with. Because I like alliteration, I call these things mechanisms, which are thinking about the things we build as marketers, how they behave, what they do, what their functionality and flow is. I mean, when you build a website, right, it's not just about the content, the messages. It's not just about the design of how those messages appears. It's about the functionality. What sort of services are you giving your prospects and customers through your website? This is rethinking about, moving from the art of communication and marketing to more about the art of customer experience. I know I get abstract on some of these diagrams, so I wanted to give a very concrete example of mechanisms. And this ties into my day job. Content marketing is big, right? So the vast majority of content marketing, though, falls in this category of passive content. And it's kind of the classic art of communications, right? It's blogs, ebooks, reports, webinars, things that people read or they listen or they watch to, but they're passively consuming them. But what's fascinating now is, partly because of this marketing technology space, marketers increasingly have tools to let them build interactive content. These are things like assessments and calculators and quizzes and configurators and solution providers. And it's another subject if you want to talk over beer. I would tell you a lot about interactive content. But the key thing about this, right, is we're thinking about how do we design marketing experiences where the audience is a participant. This is that dimension of mechanisms. So what's kind of cool is if you take that model of marketing as the intersection of those three things and you line it up against my oversimplified diagram for the software world, they look very similar. And it's not just because I drew it that way. All right, well, it's partly because I drew it that way. But no, I mean, if you actually think through the mapping, right? I mean, messages, are data, right? This is the data we use in our content management systems and our marketing automation systems. The UI for our website is the media. This is what we're thinking of. And the code, like Isaac's, campaign for nurturing and Marketo, right? The code is the mechanisms by which we're orchestrating these things. And to me, this gets really exciting because for marketers, what this technology is doing is mechanisms gives us really a whole new dimension of creativity. And when, just like Cheryl's curve, where we're still at the very early, process of adopting this, we are learning how to harness mechanisms as a part of the mission of demand generation, of brand building. One way of looking at this, and this is credit to Ray Velez, who's the CTO of Razorfish. Many years ago in a book, Converge, way ahead of his time, he wrote, for marketers, this almost becomes thinking of more like product managers rather than marketing managers. That you think of these, touch points with customers that are powered by technology as almost little mini products, and how you manage the evolution of them and how they serve their audience. So, where does this get us? One of the things that gets us into marketing, just an incredible demand for innovation. Now, marketing always had a relationship with innovation, right? But it was largely an input into marketing, right? The company would come up with the next version, the next new product, and they would give it to marketing. And marketing would be like, oh, that's a wonderful innovation. We get to use our 2 favorite words in the dictionary, new and improved. But now in today's world, right, I mean, we still have that relationship with innovation, but because of all this explosion of the digital world where we're trying to rethink how do we reach and engage customers through these new channels and touch points, marketing's being responsible for innovating that process themselves. But this is kind of a different mission for us. I split management missions, there's any number of ways you could divide them, but here's one way of dividing them between activities that are around innovation and activities that are around scalability. And the reason I divide them this way is I think they are actually, there's a dichotomy here, right? In innovation, you're generally looking to experiment. In scalability, you're generally looking to standardize. Innovation, we explore new possibilities. Scalability, we're exploiting the ones we know that work. In innovation, this is where the fail fast mantra comes from. But in scalability, right, I mean, if you're on the hook for delivering a certain number of leads of a certain quality to, the sales team each month, it's fail not, right? I mean, it's not like, oh, yeah, we tried some experiments this month and sorry, no leads for you. But next month, roll the dice. I think you're going to get really lucky. No good. Innovation, we want to question assumptions, and scalability, it's about leveraging them. You don't want to keep questioning everything all the time or you don't get anything done. Innovation, speed really matters, but in scalability, it's about dependability. And I would posit to you that a lot of marketing's responsibilities, operationally, have fallen into the scalability category. We're about scaling marketing in a dependable way. And so as we start to embrace more and more of these innovation responsibilities too, it's a bit challenging. How do we balance these two different models of even thinking? How do you manage these things when they are so diametrically opposed? So this is one area where, again, we can look for some inspiration in the world of software and IT. IT went through a very similar challenge a number of years ago, and ironically, it was a result of Agile, right? As Agile started to come onto the scene, business owners were coming to IT saying, okay, well now you have to just build things fast, Agile. Agile just means fast. I want it fast, I want it now. Well, that was fine, but there were a whole bunch of other responsibilities that IT had that did not fit that Agile model. Things associated with infrastructure deployments, capital budgeting requirements. I mean, there were just a bunch of things here that did not lend themselves to Agile. Oh, thank you. I'll take your call tomorrow. So for a while, IT was struggling like, okay, well, how do we please all the masters here? And Gartner came along with a really straightforward idea, but a powerful one, which is to say, don't try and manage everything in IT using the same approach. That have this bimodal approach, a mode one that would be your classic, version of, infrastructure-oriented, waterfall-style-oriented, capital budgeting IT. There's still a lot of things that fit that model. But for these other projects that really do lend themselves to that more exploratory, iterative innovation, adopt Agile. Thank you. We can shamelessly steal this idea for marketing. Just cross out IT, call it bimodal marketing. This idea of saying, okay, well actually now in marketing, we really do have two different categories of activities. We want to identify which activities fall into which category, and we want managing them accordingly. And I changed the labels a little bit because mode 1 and mode 2 sounded a bit too dry. So I call it the core and the edge. And the core is a set of things that we do in marketing that are really tied to scalability. It's stuff that we know that works. We're optimizing for a standardization for dependability. The edge is this collection of more innovation activities where we're running things on a more experimental basis. We measure them in a very different way. We hold them accountable in a very different way. I propose a 70-30 split of investment between these, but that number is almost pulled out of the air. It's actually pulled out from an article Coca-Cola a few years ago had shared that the way they did budgeting was using a 70-20-10 model, that they put 70% of their marketing budget towards things that were very certain were going to work, that historically had always worked, it was their bread and butter, 20% towards things that were more emerging, that they'd had some promise with and they wanted to grow, and then 10% in that truly experimental bucket. And so I thought that was kind of as good of a dart on the wall as any to say a 70-30 split. But you know, you can pick any numbers that work for your organization. It's 80-20, 90-10, 60-40. The key idea about thinking of bimodal marketing is just to be able to say, okay, this is the set of stuff we're going to call the core and how we're going to manage it. And then this is the way in which we're going to provide some space to do more experimental innovation. Okay, so I know, I apologized earlier for getting abstract. Yes, this is another one of those super abstract things. So let's get concrete with this. Where does this matter? One of the examples this comes up for is marketing technology stacks. This slide is an illustration of the stack that we use at Ion Interactive. And I'll explain why it's overly designed in a minute. But you know, the colorful bar that you see running through the middle here, this pipe, is our core marketing technologies that we've adopted. Involved what we use for web experience, what we use for marketing automation, what we use for CRM. We do not want to change this core very frequently. It's a very big investment, not just in money, but really even just in organizational capital around implementing this stuff and understanding how to use it and rely on it. There are probably better tools we could go out and pick for marketing automation on any given, you know, quarter. We don't want to do that. The value of stability is actually greater than the latest new marketing automation system out there might offer us. But that being said, one of the advantages we get of having that core foundation is there's a whole bunch, well, there's a whole landscape, right, of other innovative products that are not core technologies to our sales and marketing operation, you know, but we're able to pull them in on a much more experimental basis. You know, we do trial projects with this stuff. We run pilots. You know, we see what works. So, to be honest, a lot of times, most of them don't work very well for us. You know, that's fine, but we didn't invest a lot in them. We tried it, we tried to learn what we could from it. If it didn't work, we moved on. If it did work, we'll keep it around. And we'll see how it grows over time, and maybe at some point it migrates into the core. But I think we want to actually have a pretty stringent criteria for deciding when something is truly going to move from that experimental stage in the edge to something that we're really going to commit to in the core. We want to keep that core as small and as focused on the things that, you know, we can just get really, really good at time and time again. So to describe why that slide is terribly overproduced, wonderfully overproduced, I run a contest with the MarTech conference every year called the Stackies, where I invite marketers to send in a single PowerPoint slide illustrating their marketing technology stack. Now, if they just, you know, like did what I do with the tech landscape and put a bunch of logos up there, it wouldn't be very interesting. But what I ask them to do is to visually represent the organizing principles behind their marketing stack, the strategy behind their stack, right? How are they thinking of all these pieces fitting together? What is their process, their criteria for not just selecting them, but operationalizing them? And it is fascinating. So you can get all these slides. They're up on SlideShare. Just Google MarTech Stackies, and there's dozens and dozens of these, and they're fascinating. But one of the patterns that you'll see again and again throughout them is this dichotomy between the core and the edge. They're not treating all marketing technologies equally. They're treating a set of them as this sort of foundational systems that they take a very different approach to how they evaluate and adopt them. And then around that, they're experimenting, constantly experimenting. So, bless you. One of the patterns that keeps emerging again and again in marketing technology, when I think about what we're really wrestling with, it's change. You know, it goes back to that set of curves I was showing earlier with the MarTech landscape, right? I mean, it's just these waves of innovation that are coming at us. They are accelerating. It's not just, it doesn't just feel that way. It is actually, I track these things. They are actually accelerating. And change is hard. Right? I mean, organizations, you know, I mean, we've always dealt with change, but the pace at which the change is coming for us is a unique challenge compared to the past. So one of the things that I wanted to tackle in the book was, okay, well, what are the ways software people, IT people, have dealt with this challenge of change because they were a little bit ahead of the curve in having the digital world continually change on them. And that led me to this book by Stuart Brand called How Buildings Learn. The cover here on the left is an illustration of two buildings that were built early 20th century. And then on the right is those exact same two buildings about 70 years later, a photograph, where you can see even though they started out identical, given 70 years, they took on these very different, unique paths to become equally ugly buildings, but differently ugly buildings too. So Brand got absolutely fascinated by this, right? Because buildings are these things that generally we think of, okay, well, you've got the building and it's done. They don't change, right? But they do. And one of the things Brand, really dove into here was they're not just changing as one big thing. The buildings actually have these different layers. And the layers are all changing, but they're changing at different time scales. And he identified 6 layers. The slowest changing one is the site, the place where the building is actually built. And hopefully that doesn't change very often. My joke is whenever I'm in California, I say, except for here, then maybe it changes more often. But generally, right, the site does not change very often. On top of that, you have the structure, the foundation. If these are done well, they can last decades, hundreds of years even. And then on top of that, the skin, the exterior, the facade. And then you get into the inside where, like the services structure, plumbing, electricity, these systems, they change. They change, if they're done well, hopefully over decades, but they change. And then inside that, we have the space plan, the interior walls, doors, windows, that stuff. In commercial space, that might change every year or two. And then inside that, we have this layer of the stuff, right? Our furniture, the art, the plants. And that can change really almost every day. So there's 2 thoughts about this. One is, this change happens, right? It's not a question of, oh, do we want this change to happen or not? It just empirically happens. So what Brand got really interested by, and a whole school of architecture is sort of built around this, is to say, okay, if we can't stop that change, but if we recognize that change is going to happen, can we design buildings so that the layers that inherently change more slowly are structured in a way to facilitate faster change at the layer above? I mean, one of the best examples would be the way services can be laid out in a building. You can lay out services in a way that actually provides you a tremendous amount of flexibility for reconfiguring the space plan without having to make expensive changes to the services systems. As an interesting aside, Brand, a number of years later, collaborated with the musician Brian Eno, and the story goes that they sketched on a napkin in some pub in the UK, this view of pace layering for civilization, that there's nature changes very slowly, and then culture, governance, infrastructure, commerce, fashion, each getting faster and faster as you go up. I have no idea what you're supposed to do with this. It just, it's kind of cool to have an anecdote about Brian Eno, I guess. Okay. Well, actually, okay, this is why the people at Gartner, I'm going to come back to them, are much smarter than I am. Because they saw this stuff with pace layering, and it actually triggered an idea for them. They recognized this multi-layered set of change also applies to what we see in IT systems. That IT systems are constantly changing, but they're not all changing at the same rate. And they organized them into 3 layers, this idea of systems of record, which are the slowest changing, like our core customer data, core transactions. So these are things like why we don't change our financial systems every quarter, why we don't change our CRM every quarter. Then on top of that are the systems of differentiation, which for them largely have to do with more operational services around our business. Like if you were in retail, for instance, things around like point of sale systems and the way in which they're managed, right, connected to inventory. So these might be things of systems of differentiation. But then on top of that are these even faster moving systems of innovation. And since we're all friends here, we can say actually the marketing department is the folks who's typically pushing the most for these systems of innovation. These are things like, right, changes to the websites. You know, hey, can we get a mobile app as a way to engage these people? These are systems of innovation, and they change very, very rapidly. So the idea of this is really the same thing that Brand was talking about with the architecture of buildings, which is to say, okay, listen, this change is going to happen, but if we start to organize our systems into these explicit layers, we can design them so that the layers that we need to change more slowly facilitate independent, faster changes at the layer up above. So how do I connect this to marketing? Well, let me first step back and say when I was coming across this stuff, I was really curious to see if anyone had developed a pace layering model for marketing. And I didn't come across one, so I took a shot at building one myself. You know, I mean, marketing, right? We constantly changing, but aspects of marketing are changing at different rates. You know, the foundation of marketing and marketing associated with our company, you know, our corporate culture, values, image, is the slowest changing. Changes over years. Very similar to, I mean, if you're a company that has multiple brands, you know, the positioning of those individual brands, their value propositions in the minds of the buyers, right? I mean, these things change, but they change slowly. Then on top of that, we have campaigns we build around brands. And now we get to things that do change more frequently, right? You know, like we'll have campaigns mapped out over a series of months, you know, particular concepts and audiences and messaging for them. We then get to mapping those campaigns to different channels. It turns out that omni-channel does not mean you just, you know, build it once and it's just all magically done, sadly, right? So we map these campaigns into different channels. We deal with media mix and context framing in these channels. And now we're starting to look at calendars that are typically measured in weeks. And then we get to this tactics, the particular implementations of individual communications and experiences within those channels. And up until the digital explosion, this was the top of the pace layer for marketing, right? Nothing changed more quickly than tactics we were doing in a particular channel for a particular campaign for a particular brand. But in the digital world, we're now dealing with two layers that move even faster above that. Within tactics, we now have a whole set of practices around iterations of those tactics, thanks to A/B testing, multivariate testing, personalization. And now we start to get to, I mean, this can now be moving at a pace of change measured in days. But then we have an even faster layer above that, right? Which is the feedback we're getting. Whether it's instrumentation through our you know, digital dashboards or it's you know, social media, right? We're getting this feedback in real time. It changes, it can change incredibly rapidly. So what do we do with this, right? Is this like the Brian Eno diagram where it's like, well, it's interesting, next please. Or can we harness something useful out of this? And I'd like to hope the latter. You know, that this is a little bit like thinking the way Brand thought of buildings. That by recognizing these different layers in marketing, changing at different rates, we can put in different systems and different processes and different management structures to facilitate change at the faster layers without always having to disrupt the layers below. You know, the most obvious place where this applies is marketing technology stacks. You know, that we can think of marketing technology stacks through the way they map to a marketing pace layer. In fact, when we do that, essentially this is another case where we're not borrowing, we're just outright stealing, you know, the Gartner pace layer for IT and slapping a marketing label on it, because it's how we start to think about marketing systems, marketing operations. So there's one last topic I wanted to close with on this. And it pulls a bit away from just the techie view of this. Thank you for bearing with me through my techie view of these things. This is the cover of Computer Magazine from 1987. The lead story was No Silver Bullet. It was written by Fred Brooks, who was a very famous software engineer at IBM at the time. It's a strange cover for Computer Magazine. It looks like a Stephen King novella. But the art director got carried away, I think, with the no silver bullet title. Hey, what's that mean? Well, what no silver bullet really meant in Brooks' article is Brooks predicted there was not going to be one single innovation in software development that would have a 10x impact on the outcome of software development projects. That, there would not be one new programming language or framework or management methodology that would have a 10x impact, on the success, the productivity, the speed of these software projects. Now, that was actually a very controversial claim at the time because there were a whole bunch of researchers who thought they were coming up with the silver bullet. They were creating the next programming language that was going to have a 10x impact on software. But 30 years later, we can look back and say that actually Brooks was right. There never was one single innovation in software that had a 10x impact. Now, over 30 years, there's been dozens, hundreds, thousands of, individual innovations, and collectively, I mean, the practice of software development is, improved a lot, matured a lot, but there was never a silver bullet. And so one thing we can take away from this as marketers is if we're waiting for a silver bullet to come and solve our marketing technology challenges, history would suggest we might not want to hold our breath. But the other thing from this article that was even more important to me was Brooks said there is one thing that will have a 10x impact on the outcome of software projects. And that was people. The actual individual software engineers. That really great software engineers have an outsized impact on the success of those projects. And at the time, this was the 80s, Amadeus had come out, so, use the comparison with Mozart, right? Like the differences between the average software developer and the great software developer, it's like the difference between Salieri and Mozart. And so out of this was born the phrase, this myth that the best software engineers are 10 times more effective than average software engineers. If you've ever heard that said, that myth originated with Fred Brooks' article. Now, I call it a myth because the software community has been arguing about this ever since he published it. Is it really 10x? How do you measure that? Is it 5x? Is it 15x? As the software world has sort of moved beyond the vision of the rock star programmer to more of the effectiveness of software teams. But for all that debate back and forth, having worked in software my entire career, I will say it's largely true. The very best software engineers do have a 10x impact. So why don't we hear of the 10x marketer? Right? What is so special about software people? Well, it's not talent. I mean, software has some great talent in it. Marketing has great talent in it. Every discipline, right? You have this bell curve where there's the top quartile, that is really terrific at what they do. But it turns out there were two other ingredients that software had that marketing didn't for a long time. And that's opportunity and leverage. And when we were doing a small number of mass market campaigns, there just were not a tremendous number of opportunities to try and experiment things with marketing. We had a smaller number of bets we could place. This is no longer true, right? I mean, every week now, the opposite, it's an embarrassment of riches, right? I mean, we are assaulted with more opportunities than we can ever even hope to take advantage of at all levels of the organization, from the CMO on down. It's very exciting. I mean, you can be an entry-level person in marketing today, and the opportunities you have, for delivering value, it's phenomenal. Closely related to that is this idea of leverage, right? That marketing for a long time didn't have leverage outside of its budget. It was, we applied more money to get more reach. It isn't leverage, that's just cash. Software though, right? If you had a really great piece of software, its ability to spread and be replicated essentially for free was powerful, right? This is the way you could get this multiplier effect. we see the same thing in marketing now too. I mean, don't get me wrong, budget is still very, very valuable, you know, but really great marketing experiences, really great marketing content now can have this leverage that exists beyond the money that was put behind its distribution. And so when you take these three things together, this is why talent, opportunity, leverage, this is why we had this notion of 10x software engineers. That's also now why technology and software being so integral into marketing today is giving us the era of the 10x marketer. And this isn't just me saying this. Earlier this year, Seth Godin, one of his posts, the mythical 10x marketer. You can imagine my heartbeat went up as soon as I saw this. And he opens up saying, she's not a myth. Some marketers generate 10 times or 100 times as much value. To me, this is the really exciting result of technology getting so deeply entangled in marketing, why it's worth our time to try and figure out, to adopt these new management systems, these new management ideas, so that we can really harness software to be 10x marketers. So that was my formal presentation. I see from the clock I have about 5 minutes left. Thank you for sitting so patiently through all this. I am happy to answer any questions anyone has. Anything at all, you know, landscape related, nerd trivia. I see, oh, hey, here we go.
We're going through budget planning, and one of the exercises we're working on is what percentage of our budget is going towards technology versus programs and headcount and all of that. And I was curious if there's any benchmarking stats on what you're seeing as far as where companies are making those divisions. I find it hard to do because I consider the technology almost like headcount when I can't get more headcount, but I can always get more tools.
Yes, great question. So there's a little bit right now, and I'm happy to say I know of 2 studies that are coming out within the next several weeks. So on my blog, chiefmartech.com, I think back in August, I wrote about a study that was published by DataXu, DATAXU, based here in Boston. And they got some really great data from, I believe, something like 1,000 marketers who participated in it, you know, in some sense of what they were adopting technology-wise, their investment levels, how much of it's being done internally versus through external service providers. So that's helpful. There are 2 other studies I know of. The folks at Walker Sands, who did a really nice MarTech survey last year. They just completed another one. It hasn't been published yet, but it will be published in the next week or 2, and that's got some of that data. The Corporate Executive Board, CEB, they have a study that I just finished fielding on it that goes, actually they took my MarTech landscape and they actually dive into effectiveness and budgeting allocations for every single, I know this is, the people who participate in this, God bless them, every single category on that marketing technology landscape to actually get a sense of, you know, across that landscape, where are the trends of what's, you know, being most effective, what's most costly, what's most difficult, what's, you know, not just technical difficulty, but organizational difficulty. So hopefully that'll be out in November, and I think I'll have some really great data. And I just remembered the folks at Ascend2 just came out with a MarTech study too. I don't think it has a lot of budgeting data, but if you're looking for, you know, some stats on how other marketers have been thinking about their marketing technology, it would be a good report to pick up too. Walker Sands. Yes, Walker and Sands. And I guarantee you once both of that and the CEB one come out, I will be publishing both of those on chiefmartech.com. So one source for it all.
Great, we have time for one more question.
All right.
So as someone who has gets the pulse of all this technology out there, and there's over 3,000 companies, what's got you really excited right now? I mean, you don't have to mention specific company names, but what makes you say, oh my gosh, this is incredible?
So there's two answers to that. There's the answer of what gets me pragmatically excited today, and then there's sort of what I see coming down the pike, not relevant to today, but very exciting around the corner. For what's, to be honest, most exciting today, and this is, if I hadn't already given away how much of a nerd I am, this will absolutely seal it for you, is that category I put up around iPaaS, Integration Platform as a Service. That, you know, one of the big challenges with this explosion of MarTech innovation was, I mean, you saw it again and again in survey after survey for years, was people like, well, we love these individual tools, but we're having a hell of a time getting them all connected together. And the vendors who build these tools, you know, the platform vendors in particular, they've worked very hard to make that better, but it had been still quite difficult. These iPaaS services, and some of them, even the really simple things like, you know, Zapier and if this then that, open up so much capability for non-technical marketers to be able to pull things from these tools and be able to synchronize them together. Tremendous innovation there. So that's today. Just looking a little bit further down the curve, it's not a category, but it is a set of capabilities around machine learning and machine intelligence that, you know, the big challenge we wrestle with in marketing is this explosion of complexity, right? I mean, it has gotten so complex that no human being can actually wrap their head around all these different parts that are moving and all the different rules and all the different, you know, micro segments and all this. It's gotten beyond, you know, the capacity to keep it in your head. The thing that's really exciting, it's starting to come to fruition, of machine intelligence is to be able to get computer algorithms that really will be able to help reduce some of that complexity. I mean, actually, it's funny. They won't reduce the complexity of what's actually happening, what's actually operationalized. In fact, they'll increase the complexity. But the interface that they will give us as marketers will simplify that interface and will hopefully allow us to get a little bit of a higher level view of how all these things are connected together. So hopefully not too far away from that. All right, well, thank you again so much for coming here. Hope you enjoy the rest of Marketing Props.